I'll welcome everyone. I don't need to come down. Let's see. I'm Kosha Tucker. I'm a staff attorney at the ACLU of Georgia, and I'm one of the hosting organizations of this event today, where we're going to discuss decriminalization and reclassification of minor offenses in Georgia. Very happy y'all were able to join. I know we had some representatives who were able to stop in this morning and listen in. They have to rush off to session, so they won't be with us all day, but hopefully they'll drop back in as we continue to speak. I'm hoping that this will be a conversation. I do want to learn from our panelists, but there will be time for all of you to ask questions throughout and make this a dialogue so that we can learn from one another. And I will start by introducing them. To my left, we have Mayor Ted Terry. Yeah.
Good morning.
I had to learn how to use this mic situation. Here, is yours on now? Good morning. Mayor Ted Terry has lived in Clarkston for 4 years and in DeKalb County for about 10 years. This is all from your mayor bio page, so.
Update that. 8 years.
8 years.
15 years in DeKalb.
He's currently serving as the mayor of Clarkston. He is most known for, at least in my opinion, and the reason why I'm so glad that he's able to join us here this morning, for decriminalizing the possession of marijuana in the city of Clarkston. Yes. To my right, we have Zanelli Kubani, who is a dear friend of mine and also a practicing public defender in Fulton County. She is the supervisor of the misdemeanor division there, and will be able to talk a lot with us about the ways in which these minor petty misdemeanors affect the everyday lives of her clients, and the effects that it has on the criminalization of poverty. Thank you for being here. Brother Haroon is here to my far right. He is the founder and president of an organization called Street Groomers. This started in 2015, and its mission is to unify street tribes and create street patrol units to ensure that marginalized communities are safe and clean. Haroon has direct and intimate knowledge about the criminal legal system, and he can share his experiences and that he's endured directly from the policies that are in place in Georgia and the criminalization of minor offenses like marijuana possession. So thank you for being here. And Mr. McCain.
He'll be here in a moment.
All right.
There he is.
Speak of the devil.
Come on, Tom.
Morning, y'all. Morning. Just in time. Yeah.
I'll introduce you while I walk up here to the panel. Tom McCain, who may be well known to all of you, is the executive director of Peachtree Normal. He is a retired Georgia peace officer who served as a deputy sheriff in Lawrence and Johnson County. He retired as the chief deputy of Johnson County and holds a specialized senior deputy certification. After his retirement from law enforcement, Tom was reintroduced to cannabis as a way to deal with chronic back pain. He has worked as a marijuana reform activist for some time now, so he can speak to us about the ways in which he's been active directly in the community to push Georgia to join the rest of the country in legalizing marijuana. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
So I want to start by sort of setting down some definitions for what we consider decriminalization and reclassification to mean, and that can ground us here at our conversation with our panelists this morning. So when I think of decriminalization, I think of reducing or eliminating the criminal penalties associated with crimes. And so that might mean making it such that you can't be arrested or jailed for a criminal offense. So it would remain a crime, might remain a misdemeanor or it might remain an ordinance violation, but the criminal penalties associated with that would go away. So no jail time, no arrest, maybe only a fine. That's what we consider decriminalization. Reclassification, on the other hand, is when you are taking an offense and moving it from one category to another. So for example, you might have a felony marijuana offense that is now a misdemeanor marijuana offense. Or you might have a misdemeanor marijuana offense that is now a civil infraction as opposed to a criminal offense. Similarly with traffic offenses. It might, instead of being a misdemeanor or a criminal offense, it would be a civil infraction, where there would be no criminal penalties, of course, no criminal record, typically a fine, though. So that's what we mean when we talk about decriminalization and reclassification. And so with that, I would like to ask all of the panelists to share with us what they believe the benefits of either or both decriminalization and reclassification of minor offenses in Georgia. And that might include marijuana possession, traffic citations, disorderly conduct, criminal trespass, theft by shoplifting, a number of petty misdemeanors that quite frankly can ruin people's lives. So I'm going to start to my far right with Haru.
Okay. Yeah, about me being a part of that, being a person that was a victim of drugs and stuff like that, I ain't doing my sober. But like I say, it's hard on your record because a lot of these police, it's a game to them. They think it's cool to lock you up. And you know what I'm saying? Some people get out there and they sell weed because what, you hungry, you gotta eat. You gotta live somewhere out there. Now, you have a felony, you can't go get that job everybody else get. So what you gonna do? You gonna hustle. So you know what I'm saying? You gotta figure out how you can work with these people and help them do better with their lives. People are afraid to come talk to a lot of people because they think they're gonna go to jail. You see what the government doing? You know what I'm saying? They focus on what? The hood. If you look for gang members, where you gonna go? To Bankhead, not Buckhead. So ain't nobody gonna come this way. People gotta start to realize, and the most people that's caught up in this is the gangs. They want to have a bad record, so you're gonna do what you gotta do. Gangs stick together, they family. This is considered a gang in the street world. And people like, what you mean? Because you're a bunch of people talking. So what we gotta do, we gotta figure out how we can help these guys with their records. We gotta talk to them. Because like I said, I came from the streets, and I told the brothers I wasn't gonna forget them. I said, I'll be back, man, I ain't gonna forget y'all. Oh, I still call the Bloods, the Crips, the Vice Lords, the G's, everybody. Because believe it or not, them the ones that stopped me crying. I had a little, you might not think it's the truth, or be like, well, nah, they gonna hurt you. Like, I've had people pull up on Chapel Road and be like, man, I'm safe. Don't nobody hurt me. And believe it or not, the only way you can control it, you gotta talk to these folks. So let's get them jobs and let's clean these records up, man. Let's stop locking people up for stupid stuff.
I especially like the end of that answer. Thank you. Zanelli, what are your thoughts on the benefits or downsides, if there are any, of decriminalization or reclassification?
So I actually will just pick up a little bit with where Haru left off, which is let's clean these people's records up, right? It's been a couple of years since I've intentionally studied this, but a few years back, I did look to see what the collateral consequences are for having a criminal history in Georgia, particularly a felony criminal history in Georgia. And at the time, it was over 700. And I can imagine what it is now. We were right at about the second state with the highest number of collateral consequences for having felonies in Georgia, or having criminal convictions depending on what they are. And so the assumption is that because people are arrested or maybe the cases are diverted, it has no consequence to the person. But even something as minor as a theft by shoplifting can affect them long term. And when we say theft by shoplifting, a lot of times we're talking about, it is the criminalization of poverty. It's a minor criminal trespass where somebody goes into a gas station or Walgreens and they steal a $10 or $15, bottle of deodorant and lotion. And then that person is arrested for several days, which quite frankly costs us a lot more to house them for that many days than it does to write a citation or to come up with some other alternative as opposed to arrest. But then we bring them into court systems. Sometimes we do criminal, we make them we give them convictions, but even in an instance where they don't have convictions and someone says, okay, we'll divert it. You go take a community service class and then we won't charge you with this crime. Well, the effects of that often has lasted anywhere from several weeks, and it could last up to 2 years for a misdemeanor, right? But that charge is pending and being carried over their heads. And even if we say, go do community service, what a lot of people don't realize is that if your charge, your underlying charge is theft, even misdemeanor, a lot of the 501c3 organizations and the community service organizations will not accept you. So even just finding a place for them to go and do the community service, to have the charge dismissed, is also a challenge. And that's ultimately, right, often the reality of people being impoverished. And that's just one small example. Another example, I guess, of the way this manifests is when we arrest people and we give them cash bonds for things like criminal trespass and disorderly conduct because they just didn't move fast enough, right? Or they didn't step off of the private grass and onto the public sidewalk fast enough. Or someone just got annoyed and frustrated with the fact that they were asking questions. And unfortunately, a lot of times that population also intersects with the mental health population. And so then the effect for those people is that they get arrested, and rather than just getting a bond, well, they get a cash bond, often they can't afford it, but even if they get that number and someone can afford it, the fear is letting someone out of custody who has a mental health issue or a diagnosis. And so even that group of people often gets just reset or diverted into some other, there are a lot of mental health programs in Fulton County, which I actually do applaud. But the consequence there is not something we should lose sight of, because they also then sit in custody for a little while longer just to get to that program, because people are fearful of letting that group of people out and there's many resources. The effect is pretty profound, and then people lose significant amounts of income and jobs and resources for their families just by sitting in custody for a couple of days on a misdemeanor. And it really is something that we have to be more intentional about addressing, because you can't get your time back.
Thank you, Zanelli. And we're going to return to several of the points that you made, so thank you for introducing those to us. And before we get to Mayor Terry, I wanted to just acknowledge that Senator Harold Jones did stop in, and so thank you for being here. Appreciate it. Okay, Mayor Ted, your thoughts on the benefits of decriminalization and reclassification in Georgia?
Yeah, absolutely agree with what was said earlier. I think the intent of decriminalization and classification and ultimately expungement is the paradigm that you brought up. Is once you're in the criminal justice system, once you have that record, once you've gone through, quote unquote, the system, that it becomes very hard to escape from it. It kind of goes with you. And so, the goal should be for policymakers to divert, to decriminalize, to prevent as many people going into that system as possible. Now, we absolutely need to reform just the justice system, and this is where restorative justice comes into play, less punitive punishment. But for today, the goal is, quote unquote, offenses that aren't a public health threat, that aren't aren't a violent threat to the community. Those are opportunities for us to provide corrective behavior, to provide support. In the situation of marijuana and cannabis, and Tom will speak to this as well, it simply is something that just shouldn't be illegal. The possession of the distribution should all be regulated, and we should derive taxes from it. One person told me a couple of years ago, when the city of South Fulton was considering adopting the Clarkson ordinance on decriminalization of marijuana, a panelist said, look, one person's decriminalization is another person's medical marijuana. And she went out to outline the health issues that she faced because of an injury, and she's drugs that she had allergies to, and cannabis was the only medicine that she could take to function in her life. And so you have to kind of think about the perspective and the situation that people are in when something is criminalized. It can become debilitating and ultimately remove them from our economy, from our society. And the long run impact of that is that we just end up paying more for it in our tax dollars. One last thing I'll mention, and this has been talked about a lot, but just the criminalization of homelessness. And Utah, is a very, I think, great example. They, looked at the numbers and they said we're spending more money on criminalizing homelessness with all of the police and the courts and all the things that we're doing to stop homelessness. Why don't we just provide homes? It's cheaper, and guess what? The evidence shows that it actually helps a lot of people. And so, I think to me, this, is an effort to really have a hard discussion and a serious discussion in our community about where we think we need to divert our police and criminal justice resources, and where we can provide more compassion, more restorative justice, more opportunities to be part of our society.
Thank you, Mayor Tom.
So, first thing I'd like to do is thank Mayor Ted for being the first in Georgia to implement an ordinance which reduced the harm caused by a marijuana arrest. So, since that time, we have 11 other jurisdictions that have done that to some degree or another, so that there is no arrest made necessarily. And we're about to, on Thursday night, Hinesville, Georgia, is going to be holding a city council meeting to talk about reducing their penalties there also. So this is something that's taken hold in Georgia and of course I'm going to speak to the marijuana space because I'm the executive director of Beach Street Normal. So the harm that's done by marijuana arrest is just crazy in this state. If you're a student, you lose federal benefits, you can lose scholarships, and it's all over something that is proving to be not harmful in the first place. There's, as a matter of fact, they did a study, and the number of deaths related to marijuana are the same as those related to being gored by a unicorn. So it's not harmful. It's victimless. Adultery is still against the law in the state of Georgia. It's still a misdemeanor. It carries, same penalties as possession of marijuana, but there's victims in adultery. You've got the injured spouse, you've got children, you've got the whole court scene that you have to go through a divorce. So, it has victims. Marijuana? No. I'd like to talk about what Thomas Jefferson said. He was talking about religion when he made this statement. There was a law that was about to be passed or being debated in Virginia about if you wanted to be a member of the political party, then you had to be a member of a certain religion. So, and what Jefferson said was, what matters it to me if my neighbor believes in 10 gods or in no God? It neither breaks my purse, breaks my leg, nor robs my purse. And that's pretty much the way I feel about marijuana and marijuana possession and marijuana usage. If I'm sitting on my porch smoking a bowl, and I'm not bothering my neighbor, then what harm is it? What harm is it doing? It's not bothering, it's not harming my neighbor. So I think that what we have happening here in Georgia is a move towards decriminalization, and I think there's just something that's absolutely essential, because the inability to get a job, having to be on probation, the fines, it's a just us system, it's not really a justice system. So when you take a look at all of the add-ons, there's the judge's retirement fee, and there's the drug investigation fee, and there's more fees and more fees. So a $1,000 maximum fine winds up costing you often $2,000. And then when you put on probation, you have to pay the probation fees, $45 a month. If you're taking a urinalysis monthly, you have to pay for that yourself. So it's just, it's the just us system. It's piling money on top of money, and it needs to end, and we need to start thinking about the human aspect of this rather than the fiscal aspect of it.
Amen.
Thank you, Mr. Kane. And I'm actually going to stick with this. I'm going to stay with you, if I may. I'm going to put your mic back on. What are your thoughts on how we got here? Everything you just said sounds very no nonsense. You're not harming anyone. It's a victimless offense. It's other states have legalized, and Georgia's behind. How do you think we got ourselves here, where we are attempting to make incremental change with decriminalization, but haven't yet done so?
Well, we got ourselves here in 1937, when the cultivation, possession, production, whatever of cannabis was prohibited by the Marijuana Tax Act of 1937. So I could talk about just that all day long, and all of the industrialists that made that happen, greed, money, and made that happen. But I won't. Let's move on. In 1969, that act was declared unconstitutional by the Supreme Court. So it was criminalized by a unconstitutional act. And that was proven in 1969. The case is Leary versus the United States. In 1970, they decided to create the Controlled Substances Act and put marijuana on Schedule 1 as having no medicinal value, despite the fact that they knew in 1947 that it stopped seizures, epileptic seizures. University of Utah did, or a university in Utah did a study about that. So they did that despite it. And then, despite the Schaefer Commission's results to President Nixon, which recommended that marijuana be decriminalized nationwide, he ignored that because it didn't go along with his political views, or it didn't go along with his program. How did we get here in Georgia with trying to make changes, or how did we get here in Georgia with trying to keep it like it is? I guess that's the question. So with trying to keep it like it is, it's a matter of lost revenue. We arrest 25,000 plus individuals for simple possession, for just having a gram or so of it or less in your pocket. The fines are $1,000, max fines are $1,000, so it doesn't take rocket scientists to figure out that 25,000 plus arrests every year at $1,000 a pop is $25 million spread out over the state. So that's some of it, or that's a portion of it. The other portion of it is just the loss of perceived power. The Sheriff's Association fights this tooth and nail. Chiefs Police Association, not quite so much, but still their rhetoric is also against it. So that's how we have stayed where we are, is through that. But how we have gotten to where we are now is the fact that organizations like ours are out there pushing the reality of it, not the reefer madness of it. So
this problem is disproportionately has a disproportionate impact on people of color.
Absolutely.
And so, Ms. Gubeni, if you would talk to us a little bit about why you think we have remained so behind in how we treat marijuana possession, and in particular, the disproportionate impact that you're seeing on communities of color with minor misdemeanors, with a particular emphasis on marijuana possession.
So I will tell you, I guess, there are two very recent examples of how this has impacted people's lives that come to mind for me. The reality is, right, the majority of our practice, the majority of our work is disproportionately Black or brown people, particularly Black or brown men, although the number of women being arrested and also charged with crimes is on the rise, especially for minor offenses, which, remember I told you, right, affects you in 700 plus ways in Georgia. You know, he talked about it affecting your ability to get school loans, etc. It also obviously affects your ability to get jobs, but it also dictates in many circumstances where you can live and what kind of resources you can get to make things better for yourself or for your family, especially if you're talking about a lot of parents and mothers. But it certainly, you know, there are two stories, I guess, that come to mind, and they're not very long, but it's a perfect example of how if we don't stop this now, we are breaking up families long term. I very recently got a phone call from a teacher who currently lives in the Carolinas. She was born and raised in Georgia, had been here forever. But she was a 19-year-old child. She had a misdemeanor arrest in Georgia. The effect of that arrest, you know, she pled to the charge, she served, you know, she did what she needed to do to have that sentence completed, and now it's 20 years later and she is married, she's a mother, she has moved on to another state. While she was in Georgia, fortunately, it did not stop her from being able to make a living for herself. But she left our state and went on to get her teacher certificate somewhere else, and she had a job offer. This came out because she had a job offer in Carolina. They had, you know, where she was going to go work as an educator. As an educator, and they ran her background, and this 20-year-old misdemeanor charge from Georgia came up. Yep. And she was emotional, and, you know, it was a very hard conversation to listen to because of what we criminalized for a 19-year-old many moons ago. And so when you ask the question, how do we get here? I think one of the ways we get here is by forgetting the redemptive qualities of humans and people generally. And I guess in that same vein, just 2 days ago was the Super Bowl. And I remember my brother saying, there was a, you know, Kansas City won, yay. There was a guy that they were interviewing. And when they were interviewing him, my brother looked up and said, that man is not supposed to be there. And I said, what do you mean? He said, that man was never supposed to be in that space right now. He told me his background. It was one of the players. He's from Baton Rouge, Louisiana. And when he was a kid, he was a hothead. And he was getting in all sorts of trouble. But fortunately, he had a friend who played football with him who didn't have the same circumstances that he came from. And that friend advocated strongly to his coach to give his friend a chance. And now the man, right, is not, I mean, it didn't take 20 years, right? He's just a few years, you know, less than 10 years away from an old hard past, and he just won a Super Bowl ring and is doing very well and spoke very well because of the influences that he had. And so when we talk about something like marijuana, which is, you know, by most sciences, right, a victimless offense or a victimless crime, and it does have a lot of medicinal benefits, you criminalize that for someone which may have never been, you know, may have never harmed another human being, but you criminalize that, and very easily that person could be the next teacher that's calling me 10 or 15 years down the road to say, what can I do to get this off the record, because they are now rescinding my job offer. And to add insult to injury, we also don't take into account often technology. Technology is changing. So in this particular circumstance, one of the ways that we could have helped would have been to help her try and expunge her record and try to fight that battle but the paperwork, right, doesn't exist anymore because 20 years ago we weren't the tech-savvy organizations that we are now. So when you go back to the police departments and the agencies and try to pull the records to see what happened before they'll agree to even look at it for expungement, those things don't exist, right? The officers went to the microfiche film to see if they had those records from long, long time ago, and they just don't keep them anymore. They purge them. So now what do we do with that group of people that we're criminalizing today and putting records on today and then need some recourse down the line, and we haven't created any safeguards to protect them? I mean, personally, I say we expand expungement opportunities, and we also just say, you know, regardless of what the old paperwork says, it may or may not exist anymore, we are acknowledging the redemptive qualities of people, and we are going to let this go. So, you know, it's one of those things that, and unfortunately she was a African-American female that I was speaking with. And she was not at 19 years old in a place where she could pay to play, right? Because it is very, 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 very expensive. So, you know, the programs cost money. You know, if you want a case, the programs cost money. You gotta, and in some jurisdictions in Georgia, especially, you have to pay, right? There's a $500 fee to even go to the door to ask to be allowed to pay the program so that you can get into the program in order to have the benefit of, you know, not having a conviction on your record, not to mention the cost in money. You know, if you work, it can be very difficult to satisfy even the community service requirements of a sentence or an opportunity, because you have to go when they say you can come. So it's and ultimately, right, all of these conditions are for misdemeanors. You know, a charge is not punishable by more than 12 months or $1,000, and it breaks your heart when somebody says, can I just take a couple weekends and serve my time in jail for a misdemeanor?
I want to spend some time, and Mayor Ted Terry, this question is for you, thinking about, so we just heard two folks talk about the collateral consequences that stem from a conviction of these very minor offenses, particularly marijuana possession. And you mentioned in your introductory answer about how we need to keep people out of the system, so we're not responding and reacting all the time. And we just heard, though, about how expensive these diversion programs can be in the sort of pay-to-play model. So what thoughts do you have about how we keep people from even entering the system to begin with, and how we might be able to do that in a way that doesn't disproportionately burden people who are poor?
Well, I think the first step is that every politician needs to go to jail. And what I mean by that is they actually need to experience what their constituents go through. I have no shame in admitting that I have been processed through Atlanta City Jail before. In 2006, I was canvassing for the Sierra Club, knocking on doors in Buckhead. And one of the neighbors did not like that I was knocking on their doors. And Atlanta police showed up and said, "You can't be here." And I said, "I have the constitutional right to knock on doors. What are you talking about?" And they said, "I don't believe that, and you're being arrested." And 9 hours later at 2 a.m. I finally get bailed out, but they were going to let me stay there overnight, and went through the whole process. And so number one, just the having the experience of going to be processed is a dehumanizing and degrading experience. And anyone who's gone through that at least once, I think, would say, "Gosh, I never want to go through that again." And certainly, if you were a public servant, you wouldn't want anyone to go through that. And so, there's a little bit of I think in politics there's always the urgency of the issues, and and I got to hand it to Senator Jones because he's been our top advocate in the state Senate on the reform of marijuana laws. But if we don't put the urgency of these changes to the forefront, then politicians sort of say, "Well, we'll get to it," or maybe we can sort of incrementally, kind of go down that route. And maybe we'll get there one day. But at some point, you have to have a critical mass of people that says, enough is enough and we have to change things. And so we're going to have to start, demanding from our politicians at every single level, and particularly on this issue because we want to see change at the State House and State Senate. But the reality is that the biggest sort of part of our justice system happens at the local level. It's who we elect for judge. We elect judges in Georgia. They're nonpartisan, so they're on different ballots, and that's always interesting because the turnout's really low. DAs, solicitors, Fulton, DeKalb, Gwinnett. In essence, in those counties, decriminalization is underway. Just by the fact of how an officer is enforcing the state law, but then they're choosing to divert it out of the system. And so, that's because we've elected good people to make those decisions, for them. And then when it comes to mayor, city council, county commission, that's the police department, the sheriff's department. These things can change. Last thing I'll just say is, it was told me once that when we want to have a justice system, and the definition, I think is that you pay for the crime or the mistake that you made, once. Injustice is paying for it over and over and over again, which is what was pointed out by Zanelli. And so, in 2020, we're 2 decades into the 21st century. It's obvious that Jim Crow era rules and laws are still into effect. We know that by the evidence. And we have to, I think, start demanding at all levels of government that we make changes.
And I see that Mr. Whiteside has joined us. This is the Gwinnett County Solicitor General. Thank you for being here. What number mic are you?
Oh, it says number 13. I don't know if that's lucky or bad.
It's lucky today.
Traffic was bad.
I'm going to get to you, Solicitor General, in just a moment because I would love to hear your thoughts and reactions to what Mayor Ted just said about having good folks in these positions who can make these prosecutorial decisions, because that's right up your alley. But I wanted to ask Haroon first. In your work with street groomers, what barriers have you seen with people who have been arrested and charged but not yet convicted to stay out of the system, to get out of the system?
They're being used and played by what you call, not everybody, but a lot of guys, gangsters in suits. People still think they're Al Capone. You feel like with the voting, because people got to pay attention. If you get 400 people on probation and they can't vote, you got a better chance of winning. You get you 1 million felons. Now that Georgia passing it, you got what? You got people that can't vote. So you got to pay attention to the ones that's eating off of this. You know what I'm saying? People that's eating are the people that's winning. So you got to watch who y'all putting up in office. That's right. Because they gangsters, I'm believing. And I told Kim to his face, he's the biggest gangster I know. You know what I'm saying? I'm going to be honest with you, man. That's how they win these elections. That's how they do it, because people say, oh, they not voting in the hood. You not voting because you can't. You've been sacrificed. That's why a lot of people don't want weed legal. Because they're going to sacrifice the folks in the hood. Pay attention to what's going on out here. They number gangsters and suits, man. Gang bangers that ain't got caught yet.
Thank you.
For real, they like to kill.
I think this is a great segue, Mr. Whiteside.
You got a suit on.
Before I wore a suit, I wore a uniform as a police officer. And I'd like to say a couple things what the Honorable Mayor from Clarkston says and piggyback on that. And I think we're friends on Facebook also. There's a great deal of issues that are true, and even though I came in late, I can understand them all because, number one, I had 15 years of experience as a police officer, 23 as an attorney, and members of my staffer here who I've known for a great deal of time, and we talk about basically voting for the right people. You have to have the right people, and they have to have a great deal of experience and a great deal of empathy. And two of them are here today. Patsy Austin Gatchett is running for district attorney at Gwinnett County, and Curtis Quinn is running for sheriff. And I think what the mayor said is very important. What we do in Gwinnett County, I think, is, I don't know about the word progressive because I'm 62 years old. I don't know about those terms. I just think it's what's just and fair. We were the first solicitor's office in America to not prosecute marijuana because when the hemp law came, we felt that scientifically you couldn't prove the difference between hemp and marijuana, so therefore it would be unjust to try to prosecute someone. Now, Danny Porter, who was our district attorney, said, well, there's going to be a machine in 3 months to tell the difference between hemp and marijuana. That wouldn't be true, and that would be unfair to the citizens of Georgia and all citizens of America. Florida piggybacked us. They did the same thing. Tennessee, they did the same thing, and other states did the same thing also. First of all, if you're an attorney, if any attorneys are in here, you know that if you're going to be an expert witness, it's going to take you at least 10 to 20 trials to say I'm an expert in this machine. So that's going to be about 2 years. There's no machine whatsoever. And the equity is fair because, number one, this takes all the controversy out of is there discrimination in police stops? Does someone have the discretion to tear up? When I was a police officer, I started off in Gary, Indiana. If we had someone there with a joint, I would tear it up. And this is back in the 80s. And because it wasn't worth my time to arrest you, put you in a car, and transport you. Now, the discretionary part, if you're a black male, I would really get into like a racial issue, but I think there's a point, if it's a black male and a white male, some people feel that if it's a black guy, you don't get that thing torn up. So now if you make it legal, it all becomes moot in regard to that. And when you talk about systematic crimes and oppression, that's what occurs if you're not going to be fair and if you're not going to be just. You have to have the right sheriff, first of all, because the sheriff intermingles with everyone else. They're trying to say that marijuana should not be legal. That's not right. They have a sheriff now that's in place now, Butch Conway, and he is not going to run for office. And I want to make it very clear that Butch Conway is not a racist. I worked with Butch Conway from, I think, 1996 to 94 to 96, but I was deputy there for 8 years. But some of the things and people he associates with give the image of unfairness. So if you associate with people that are unfair, then it is unfair. Yeah. So statistically, right now, we have more minorities in Gwinnett County that are sheriff deputies and law enforcement. And he's ushered that in, but what Butch hasn't done is become realistic that there is oppression for people being arrested. And that when you say you're going to do 287G, 287G is made to stop violent offenders, but it is now, as you were saying in your generation, it gets morphed into the fact that everybody gets arrested, everybody gets deported. So that's why you need a sheriff that is going to say, we're not going to spend $3 million on 287G. We're just going to go ahead and move forward. Right. And when you talk about the marijuana issue, we have put forth a bill, a proposal for a bill with Donald McLeod, and we're going to talk to Gloria Butler, Sheikh Rahman, and we're looking for bipartisan support. We drafted a bill to be presented that will legalize marijuana in Georgia. That 10% would go to daycare, pre-K, 10% would go to host scholarship, 10% goes to police pensions, because my mother and father were teachers. And one thing I know is that if your child is not literate by the time it's 4 years old, and if you look at Gwinnett County, people started doing pre-K, pre-algebra at 4th grade, then that child has an 85% chance of being arrested, an 85% chance of not graduating from high school. So it's important that marijuana become legal, not only because of the fact that of the oppression, but you can use the income to fund your children. And as the Honorable Mayor says, number one is that we are a prosecutorial agency, and make no doubt about that. We're actually tougher than Republicans. We asked for 30 days and 15 days on first offenses for DUI. Family violence battery, we asked for 60 days. We asked for shoplifting, we asked for 10 days. We don't believe in probation. It is better for you to do, if you commit that crime, to do straight time. Because if you are put on probation, you have an 85% chance, as the gentleman said to my left, I guess that's your right, that you have 85% chance of failing probation because, first of all, probation, we asked the probation, and we had a meeting with probation, because when I first came, I said, people don't work Monday through Friday that can get here. We need to be open on Saturday, so they open on Saturday. I said they should do it Saturday, Sunday. But you have 85% chance of failing probation, because number one, most people on probation are poor. 55 hours a month is a lot. Misdemeanor probation is 55, the other is 45. Now, the difference between going to the farmer's market downtown and, or on the outskirts of Decatur, getting $55 of food and then paying for that. And I've been married for 43 years to my wife, and I know it's expensive to raise children. I've raised 3 children. My son is a deputy sheriff, graduate of Georgia State. So there's a lot of things that come in with probation. Probation, it should be government sponsored. But when you involve a private company probation, then the majority of people that are on probation were drug offenders, marijuana. So you tell people that are private, they have a profit aspect to do that. And so what we did when we first came in, people say we have diversion programs. Well, you don't have to plead guilty, you can do a diversion program. In Gwinnett County under Republican administration, they were charging $600 for the diversion. I spoke with Patsy Elston Gatson, and what we did was say we're going to reduce it to 100 or 0, because that gives you a statistical chance to succeed. I'm not a proponent of probation. First of all, because I was a police officer. Second of all, because I was raised in a strict environment. My father was a strategic character man, my mom were teachers. I feel it's better if you have been found guilty or plead to a crime that you do straight time. Because if I can put you in jail for 30 days or 15 days, that's 15 days you do not have money to pay for your rent. 15 days you may not be on the job. And you're going to think about that. I'm going to jail for 15 days. We have currently now, and another thing about the law that we're proposing, is going to be total destruction of gang. I was a gang officer in Gary, Indiana. I ran a cruiser car, which is an in-progress car. I responded to every burglary, every home invasion, and every armed robbery in Gary, Indiana. I was plainclothes officer, but I also helped break up gangs. And one thing I know about gangs is that they sell marijuana. So if you take the marijuana away from the gangs, then that takes their fuel away. And I always make analogies about World War II. They used to bomb cities and hit the cities, and then they figured out, and my dad was strategic air command, why don't we just hit their oil depots? Why don't we take their fuel away? Because we have statistically downloaded cases where we have young men, black majority, they carry Glocks, 32-round magazines in them, traveling up and down on 78 highway, and they're caught with marijuana in the car. They have red bandanas and they have blue bandanas. So they are gang affiliated. Now if you take that marijuana away and take that aspect away, they won't be able to sell that. We have a gang problem in Gwinnett County. We went to a forum the other day, and one of the biggest questions the mother said was, what are we going to do about the gangs? Because they recruit. My philosophy is legalize marijuana, charge it at a average rate, a rate that is not above the tax rate. Because see, when you tax it like California, you're going to have black marketeering, and people are going to start getting killed again. And when you hear about drug deals so bad, you said, you know, this person was trying to sell marijuana, trying to do these drugs. That's not cocaine. Those are marijuana deals. Now, the people, I think a couple in Clayton County, a young man and a young woman, they were trying to buy some marijuana. And what they ended up was a couple bullets in their heads, because what they did was rob them. So if you would do what we do, and I think February 8th, we're going to be meeting with Home Depot, and we're going to do laminate floors. We're planning on doing it. I spoke to the manager yesterday. What you do is say, look, we're going to take away this gang aspect, but you can do the laminated floor, you can learn laminated floor, you can learn to do drywall, and learn a trade. We've been working on that with Curtis Clemens. I think we spoke to Melvin Everson, he's a Republican. So we try to go bipartisan to get in Georgia Tech, Gwinnett Tech, and they have programs and a gang initiative grant that we're trying to get to stop this. And I think when the Honorable Mayor says something, you have to have a proponent of punishment, but rehabilitation. Or it's not even rehabilitation. What you do is offer these programs before somebody's arrested. As I say, I've been married for 43 years. I've raised 2 hard-headed boys. They've done really well. They're honor students, but boys are different than raising girls. And we have to realize that. So a lot of people are cold-hearted. When we talk about the things that go on in Gwinnett, I respect Danny Porter. I respect Butch. Butch helped me go to law school. He signed my tuition reimbursement. I was a cop. And what they did was, you paid ahead, they reimbursed you. But you have to remember that you have to have programs in place because things are different. People have been oppressed. 30 years ago, I worked with Curtis Clemens, who was running for sheriff. We did midnight basketball. We paid our own money. Is that right, Curtis? Try to buy computers and buy food to help people. That's what you need to do.
Thank you.
Sorry it took so long.
I want to ask the panelists 2 more questions, and then I'm going to open it up for questions from the audience. But I wanted to ask Mr. McCain this question. You talked about the fines and fees that get loaded onto people when they are charged with these marijuana possession offenses. Decriminalization and even reclassification could still result in fees, fines and fees for people who are charged with marijuana offenses. So let's say, for example, a person in a place where marijuana has been decriminalized, they may not go to jail, but they would still have to pay a fine. A reclassification, similarly, the same thing. It may not be a crime anymore, it could be a civil infraction, but the person still might have to pay a fine. So what are your thoughts on if we move to a decriminalization or reclassification model, whether or not this will still fall disproportionately, the burden and the criminalization will still fall disproportionately on poor people?
Okay, so when I take a look at the decrim, or actually harm reduction effort in Atlanta, I did a study, or actually I just did a couple of open records requests and did a data comparison, okay, but I did a comparison of the number of marijuana arrests the year prior to the enactment of their ordinance and the year after the enactment of their ordinance, and marijuana arrests fell by 2/3. 2/3. Okay? Now, that tells me something, because that ordinance was not directed towards the police. That ordinance was directed towards the courts, where it was only a $75 fine and no chance of jail time. And I talked to a lot of cops, and I'm talking about street cops. I'm not talking about the upper level management who want to keep it the way it is. Most of them would rather we do something along these lines, because it kind of gives them a better out. Now, in my 15 years, I never made a misdemeanor marijuana arrest, never once, because I used it in my youth, and I just felt unethical doing it. So, okay, so I never made one. Now, as far as the fines and fees, yes. I mean, there's still going to be fines, there's still going to be fees, but it's one of those. Someone mentioned tiny steps, or small steps towards getting to where we need to be with marijuana in the United States, and that's what these are. It's just small steps. We have, and the legislature at some point in time is going to have to pay attention to this, and they're going to have to quit stalling our bills and killing our bills, and because this is the will of the people. So, yeah, it's still going to involve some fees, and it's still going to involve some fines. And if you take a look at some of the jurisdictions that have enacted these ordinances, you've got Mayor Ted, who I think at one point in time was talking about a $5 fine, you know, and but it wound up as a $75 fine, and then you've got the other. Well, you got Statesboro, where it can be up to a maximum of $500 still. Yeah, there's still going to be fines and there's still going to be fees, but that's where it comes. I guess that's just the price you pay. I think it's ridiculous that if you get caught with $5 worth of marijuana in your pocket, you have to pay a $300 fine even. I think it's ridiculous you got to pay a $75 fine. I think it's ridiculous that it's illegal at all, and that we should regulate it like tomatoes and be able to grow it for our own use, you know. So, but I also realize that we're not going to get there without taking some of these steps.
Thank you. And I lied, I'm going to ask more than 2 more questions. Because that just reminded me, I wanted to ask Mayor Ted, because Mr. McLean just brought up a good point about, you know, these ordinances that will direct the courts or police officers about what to do when they encounter a situation where they could arrest a person who possesses marijuana. And in Clarkston, I know that the ordinance, the new ordinance that's in place, which decriminalizes marijuana possession, relies on the discretion of the officer. And what have you seen, if anything, about officers choosing to charge under the ordinance code as opposed to the state law code when it comes to marijuana possession?
Yeah, absolutely. This is where the work at the state level and the Capitol is so important, because the concurrent jurisdiction law that was passed in 1983 that gives the municipal court the power to decide to just make it a fine and, you know, not an arrestable offense, it's standalone. So if there's anything else going on, right, an officer in the law requires that simple possession charge has to follow all the other charges that might be in play. Maybe if it's a DUI, maybe if it's you know, a robbery, anything like that. It all goes together to state courts. And so the discretion really comes into play where I think to both Brian and Tom's points, you know, we do know that there are, I believe that the vast majority of police officers are in the profession to serve the public and to be community servants. We do know that some elements of white supremacists and, you know, radical groups are attracted to police departments because they know they have a license to, you know, to abuse people, and so that's just a whole other issue. But the response from our officers is, you know, thank goodness we don't have to spend our time dealing with this stuff. And the other aspect of this is the ubiquitousness of body cameras. So whereas in the past, Tom, good police officer, saying, I'm not gonna, and even though it's against the law, I'm not gonna deal with this right now. I'm gonna let him off with a warning, or, you know, try to be a, you know, more of a mentor and a help as opposed to a punitive punishment. I've had officers say, I'm so glad that we have this city council ordinance that's giving us this discretion, because if we hadn't had it, and now that we have every aspect of our job being documented, I feel like I have to follow the letter of the law, because that could be used against me in some review down the line. And so now it's, I mean, just with body cameras going in everywhere and everything being documented, we have to give officers more discretion. For fear that they'll be boxed into enforcing the state law. We should give them that opportunity. We did try to make it a $5 fine. This is where the lawyers come into play. They say, well, a $5 fine would be a nominal fine, and they're in essence legalization. And so this is why, again, state law has to change, because there's only so far that we can go at the municipal level, and certainly, you know, the solicitor and the county courts are under different regulations.
Thank you. Zanelli, and Haroon, actually. Mayor Ted said something earlier, and he said something where, like, one person's crime is another person's medical marijuana, I believe.
Yeah, decriminalization.
Yes. I want to know, How have you seen that outside of marijuana context in terms of when one person does it, it's a crime, and when another person does it, it's not a crime, or it's not treated as a crime? And I'm betraying my bias here, but the example that comes to mind might be even a disorderly conduct offense, for example, might manifest itself as a disorderly conduct in the right circumstances because the police happen to have been called, or because it happened on a publicly, well-attended kind of street, and people felt like there needed to be a response. But that same kind of behavior elsewhere in another neighborhood at a different time of day might not have been prosecuted, may not have been responded to by, may not have received a law enforcement response. So how are you seeing this play out outside of the marijuana context, where you have, for one person it's a crime and for another it's not?
Okay. I consider that the good old boy system. That's going to break down the racism. That's what you go through now here. Just like when I was talking about Buckhead and Bankhead. You've been had drugs and crime in Bankhead, right? All of a sudden we got a problem in Buckhead, everybody going crazy. That shows you the racism in Georgia. At the end of the day, the Klan controlled this. Because when they locked them boys up as gang members, I bet them Aryan Nation boys ain't going to get no 30 years for the RICO Act. But the brothers in the hood are going to get locked up for life. So that's where it comes in. There's going to be racism. At the end of the day, the good old boy system. And people got to fail to realize that. That's why they control the vote. It'll be legal down here if certain people making money. If they not making money, they don't care. We got to keep them black folks up in the prison system so we can keep that money going. Because, I did a year in Cobb County for marijuana. I remember the dry runs. Having to keep going to court because, you know what? They making money. And Cobb County, at the end of the day, is controlled by who? The good old boys. You got Woodstock, you got Canton, you got Ackworth. I stayed out there. I know this whole city. You got Kennesaw. I break down Georgia. Atlanta don't get off the hook. You go right around the corner, you got Buckhead. You got Alpharetta. You know what I'm saying? You feel me? Just like right across the street at the end of the day. The good old boy yell, everybody be quiet. And everybody know I'm telling the truth. Kim scream all day. And don't nobody say nothing. Because at the end of the day, the good old boys control it. They don't go to jail because they're going to make sure they look out for their white guys. And I'm just going to be honest with y'all. They're going to make sure their little sons are controlled. Let's say we got 6 kids get locked up, right? 5 of them white. 5 of them black. And 1 white. Who you think going to prison? Who you think going to get the gang at? They're going to get the RICO Act, but the little white boy going back to the house. And that's how it is down here. If y'all going to handle y'all homework, you'd be surprised who kids be out here selling drugs. Who out here smoking, you know what I'm saying? They get money from their daddy, and they go to the hood and go buy 3-4 rounds. But they ain't going to get locked up because of who their father is. So at the end of the day, man, you know what I'm saying? Like you say, the good old boy system in Georgia. Georgia has not changed. Just like I was listening to these songs, I listen to all these songs. At the end of the day, they ain't nothing but country boys. They put them hats on. So I lived out there in the woods. I know. And I'm telling you, across the street, the good old boys are in charge. Because when I seen Kim and he won, I said, uh-oh, they here, y'all. They say, who? I said, the Cowboys gonna take over.
Thank you, Helen. You need the question repeated? You good?
No.
You got it.
One of the things that occurred to me just sitting here and listening to everybody talk is about the fact that everybody involved in this process has discretion about what happens to people's lives, and they are the only ones who never actually talk to the people that have to live with the consequences of the discretionary decisions that they get to make. The public defenders or the defense attorneys are the only ones involved who have those conversations with the clients and have those direct interactions with the clients. And we are the only ones involved who have almost absolutely no discretion on what gets our clients there, and we have even fewer options about what would help them get out and stay out, even though we have all the stories. So Mayor Terry mentioned a few moments ago that legislature suspend a day of jail. I agree, we absolutely should. But I also think that everybody should walk inside of a courthouse when they don't have to be there and they don't have any personal involvement, and look at the disparities in the sentences and the charging that happens in criminal courts. The officers on the streets have the discretion. Even for a traffic ticket, they have an option to arrest or not arrest. That goes to a prosecutor's office somewhere. That prosecutor's office has the discretion to charge or not charge. Then it goes in front of a judge. That judge has the discretion to make rulings on motions and also to impose sentences. And all we get to do is fight to make sure that they honor the law, and that if they are going to affect someone, we get to be the ones to stand up and tell them how it happens. But ultimately, we have to function within the parameters of discretionary decisions that other people get to make, with laws that have limitations for us. So to the extent we start talking about how these things play out disproportionately in the court, it is a multi-leveled or multi-layered like combination of choices that other people get to make about clients that they ultimately walk away from. And so that is, quite frankly, one of the hardest things we have to deal with. So I guess with that in mind, what I would encourage people to do, because we're not public defenders. I mean, public defenders and criminal defense attorneys are not public officials. Everybody else is, right? We're not public officials. Go meet your local public defender. Go to your local public defender office. Ask them, can you shadow for a day? Ask them what courtrooms to go in to look at the arrest decisions that were made, the charging decisions that were made, the sentences that were imposed. Ask them about some of the stories for some of their clients, and I promise you, it will be more enlightening to you than any statistic you will hear any elected official with discretion give you, because it is profound and you wouldn't believe what happens inside of criminal courts. So just go. They're public places. Just go if you want to see what that looks like and how it plays out.
Thank you very much, Zanelli. And that makes me remember, and Bridget, I want to get your question, you know, with these proposed budget cuts to indigent defense, that's, Zanelli is doing the Lord's work. I'm not even a religious person, but my mom told me that when I was a public defender. And so if you do, or if you do have faith and you believe that, that is what she's doing every day. And these cuts are not just a figure on a piece of paper. It will affect people's real lives. Question. Now I'm going to open it up to the audience. We have a few more minutes that our panelists will be here with us. I think we have one question.
So my question is directed, how did you say your name? Zanelli? Okay, that's a beautiful name. So my question is for you. I work for an organization, Women on the Rise, and in collaboration with Southerners on New Ground, we have a hub. It's called the Participatory Defense Hub here in Atlanta, and it's to help curtail some of the things that you're talking about. And we do things like court watch. We help people with the process for the criminal justice system from the beginning, and we're getting a lot of cases that are post-conviction and folks need relief from having these harsh sentences. And I wanted to know how we could be in right intention to work and partner with you, because you seem like you said, you're doing the Lord's work, and the community wants to do that work with you. We want you to know that you don't have to be alone, because we understand that you are having so much with so little, but we're willing to fight for ourselves. So we wanted to invite you in that fight with us. So when you're finished, like after this is over, I would love to exchange information.
Absolutely. And I guess in that same respect, right, we talk a lot about the laws and the rules and the legislations, but y'all, right, it's my good Georgia coming out, my good Fayette County Georgia coming out, y'all, right, if you really want to impact the criminal courts and the criminal justice system, you have to start with education. All of my clients are poor, right? That's how they get to be a public defender client. Aside from that, the number one influencing factor for the people that we represent in life is lack of education. So if we really want to reform criminal justice, we need to deal with education first. And in education, out of education comes a lot of the mental health, right? And the resources that are or are not provided to people very early on. Because you may or may not know, but a lot of the onset of those diagnoses happen between 18 and 23. When people all of a sudden, are experiencing things that may have been there before, but now they're experiencing them by self-medication with marijuana, or acting out in the criminal justice system, and people aren't educated even about what that looks like, right? So start with education. There's mental health. You also deal with homelessness as well when you start with education. So when you start talking about how in a participatory defense model we can collaborate, a lot of it is about coming up with alternative resources and resolutions for our clients. So any community programming out there, finding the diversion programs that don't cost as much for the clients, because that's unfortunately a requirement that we have. All of those things are things that ultimately help us try to come up with better resolutions for our clients outside of the parameters of the law. And then what I do encourage people to do is talk to elected officials. Put the pressure on elected officials so that when the public defender shows up with this alternative plan, right, we can actually get approval, because they have to approve all of those things because they have the direct discretion. We can get approval to have our clients take advantage of those plans, or we have more resources and options for them.
Okay, so I would just like to invite you to check out the San Francisco, it's down in the Bay Area. They came up with a model. Okay. So we just want to work in collaboration with, because all of the things that you're saying is absolutely on target. So we just want, community wants to be a more active part, and that is the problem. It's the missing, at the end of the day, elected officials work for us, but I don't think that they realize that, and they think we work for them. And we are here to cancel the narrative, so we just want you to invite you into that.
Thank you.
I want to piggyback on that. There shouldn't be any cuts for a public defender, because when I first left the sheriff department,
I became an appointed attorney, and I worked for Gwinnett County. We don't have a public defender system. They appoint your attorneys, and you find out a lot of your clients. I did that for 23 years before I got elected in 2010. Found out a lot of your clients are not guilty. Also, of course, I was a private attorney, and it just reminds me what the Honorable Public Defender says. Is I remember I had a case in DeKalb County. Guy called me and said, "Hey, Mr. White, I didn't do it." He was accused of kidnapping and armed robbery. And the system was set up that you have very little bit of investigation. He was facing a life sentence. He gave me $1,500 on a case that usually I think kidnapped is $20,000. I had 1 week to prepare. And I spent the whole week reading that. He was found not guilty. But he was facing a life sentence. So you cannot, it's unfair to the solicitors and the DA to cut the funding, because they're advocates for justice. And see, another thing is we take an oath to seek justice. And the whole point about that, we get a report. Police write a report. They have limited time to make a report. It's okay, let me go ahead and make this report. Limited time, usually 1 or 2 pages. And then we actually have investigators who investigate that. Curtis Clemens, who works with us part-time now, he's running for sheriff. They investigate that, but you have a limited time. And so what they do, they research it, they bring witnesses, they bring everything, and usually I sit down and say, let me look at that, because I've been on that side before. And so, this is bullshit. We dismiss a lot of cases, but we prosecute a lot of cases, but we can look and see. And that's why it's valuable that the gentleman makes a good point. You cannot have an old boy system. You have to pick the best and the brightest. You're investigators have to have an instinct for justice. Your attorneys cannot be all your friends. When I came in, I don't think we terminated any attorneys, and that was from a Republican administration. Because a lot of them were good. Those who wanted to leave, they got out because, oh, this guy's a Democrat, is going to be so wild and free, you know. But that wasn't true. We were real strict. But the whole point is that we have to have a public defender system because that is one of the first protections against injustice. And if you're a true prosecutor, people say, Mr. Whiteside, can I talk to you? First answer is, no, you don't need to talk to me. You need to talk to my assistant solicitor. That's why I picked them, because they seek justice also. And I'd like to thank you for your service.
Thank you, Mr. Whiteside. We need great public defenders. We also need really progressive solicitors and prosecutors and DAs. We have a lot of questions now, but let me get Ryan here, and then I'll come to the lady in green and the person who raised her hand in the back. Yeah.
My question is for Mayor Ted. He had touched earlier on the war on the impoverished and criminalizing poverty, essentially. And I think anyone in the room who lives in Atlanta has witnessed a lot of that war on the impoverished, and instead of helping people, we're criminalizing their behaviors. But I was wondering if you had any kind of policy changes that you would expect to see, like an activist get behind, that would particularly impact, impoverished people.
Well, as they say, if you've been following the presidential campaign, this is kind of around, discussion around universal basic income. Being poor is not, a lack of necessarily education or worth. It's a lack of cash. And I believe in a universal basic income. Number one, I think that in the wealthiest nation in the history of the world, we can afford to have no people living in poverty. And so, aside from tackling that policy issue, the criminal justice system is the way to prevent people from being forced into poverty or to stay in poverty. Simple as that. It's it's everyone's heard this before, but it's very expensive to be poor. It's very expensive to be in the criminal justice system. $20,000 for that case you were talking about, Mr. Whiteside.
I wish it would have been.
And it's amazing that we have people, advocates and lawyers who are willing to do it, for less. The one thing I'll point out, the way that we fund our governments, particularly municipal governments, and we have 535 municipalities in Georgia. Would it surprise you that a vast portion of those revenues that fund our city governments come from the municipal court system? And every city has their own sort of schedule of fines and fees, and they can only charge up to $1,000. That's sort of the cap for municipal courts. But there has to be an acknowledgement that if we're funding our police departments, our courts, our general fund on police citations and code enforcement citations, then that is a regressive way to fund our communities. In 2012, Clarkston was deriving 37% of their revenues from the municipal courts. 37%. Clarkston was known as, don't drive through Clarkston because you'll get pulled over and you'll get a really large fine for whatever. Thankfully, because we had a very progressive city council, the things we've done, we're down to under 8% of our general fund is being funded by the municipal court. So we have to sort of acknowledge that there has to be a ratio there where, obviously you're still going to enforce the law. People are going past MARTA buses. Well, you have to enforce that. If you're not stopping at stop signs, you're speeding in a school zone. There are reasons we have these laws and we want to enforce them. But again, punitive punishment does not work. Fining people into poverty does not work. In the larger criminal context, restorative justice isn't, can't be the only option, but it has to be an option. And I'm really inspired by a lot of the stories that are coming out of the restorative justice movement that are, in essence, involving victims in the punishment of their attackers. And it's amazing the compassion that can can be created, and the reconciliation that can be created by involving more of the community in the justice system. I think that, to your point, since people just see it as something that's over there, and thank goodness I never have to be a part of that. Out of sight, out of mind. And if more people were engaged in it, and you had more of this restorative and community-led justice, it really would become, a community charge that, yes, if someone can't get a job, that is my problem. If someone can't find a home, that is a problem. If they do need mentorship or education, that is my problem. I think the paradigm now is that says, well, we'll just let the police and the courts deal with that, and I don't want, don't bother me with that. But we're paying for it, and it is affecting us. And as long as we just put it out of sight, out of mind, we won't actually solve it.
You still have a question?
So we're talking about overcriminalization, and the last numbers I saw, 1 in 3 kids will be arrested before they hit 23. The majority of those children are getting in trouble for cannabis and other possession-related drug crimes. I just want to know, is that what you're seeing in court as well? Are those numbers holding out for you? And also to ask, when do juries come into play? It seems like about 98% of the cases are plea deals. When do we, the jury, get to say what we think should happen to these young people and to these other people that are being charged? Thank you.
So on the first part of the question, the numbers around marijuana and cannabis are skewed only because there's been so much discussion and reform around how to address those charges in the last few years. So it's hard to really consider that group of cases. Taking it outside of the context of a lot of the marijuana cases, which are often in the misdemeanor cases, and talking about felony cases, a significant portion of those felony cases are otherwise possession, drug charges or drug-related charges, or misdemeanor charges that are now required to be felonies because of mandatory, because of recidivist laws or mandatory minimum sentencing laws, et cetera, et cetera. So the statistics are stark, but they are also in many ways very accurate. And quite frankly, you talk to any parent of a black or brown boy, they know very well that is a very likely reality for their child. And so they spend, the child's life trying to prepare them for that intersection and what they should do should it ever come across their plates. The second part of the question was, when do the juries come into play? Remember all that discretion I told you that everybody has that we don't? Is a significant portion of the reason why juries are not as involved as often as they could or even should be. Because the laws are very limiting for us, right? Especially depending on what kind of charges someone has. So if it is a charge, for example, he talked about kidnapping and armed robbery. Kidnapping and armed robbery are both mandatory minimum offenses. You get convicted of that, it's a mandatory 10 years in custody minimum every day, no parole, for both of those, with life being on the top side of that. If that is the charging decision that was made, you were arrested for that, you were charged and prosecuted for that. Once you get into the courtroom and they make an offer that's anything less than every single day of a 10-year sentence, people are more likely to take it, especially when they're young and they fall in that 1 to 3 category. Because at that point, you can't fathom taking that kind of a risk for what could very likely be a life sentence. And I say those are minimums, but in many jurisdictions, there's what they call a trial tax, right? Once the jury comes in the door, the reality of your sentence changes from being as little as, 10 years to more likely life if you get convicted. And so that's also a very real reality that plays out over and over and over and over again, because if the charges we receive, are more serious charges, then people are more likely to resolve those cases or plea them out And then as an attorney, that's a very real hard conversation you have to have with your client, which is, you know, juries are the one unpredictable piece of this whole, you know, circumstance. We cannot predict what they do. And every lawyer who's ever represented a defendant will tell you, we have won cases we thought we would lose, and we have lost cases we were certain, you know, we should win. And so clients often will go ahead and resolve their cases. But many of us look at representation now from a holistic perspective. And so we are not just talking about, you know, the police reports when it comes to our cases. We really are trying to look at those underlying issues, like whether education is a concern, and mental health or homelessness, etc. And so we do engage our social workers and other mitigation specialists to try to help us come up with alternatives. And those cases don't necessarily see juries, but there's a lot of pressure before you get to a jury in the criminal justice system. We talked about cash bails. People want to get out of jail, right? That's a horrible, dehumanizing, and degrading process, even for 9 hours. So imagine that being the case for 9 months before you have the potential of seeing a jury, right? They want to get out of jail. Once they come through the court, it is also, like he said, the back and forth. He spent a year just trying to deal with a marijuana charge. And part of that is just a system. It's back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. Come to court, okay, we reset. Come to court. It's the back and forth before you even get there. All of that time is affecting your ability to have an income, have a home, right? Have friends and family who will continue to support you once you get out. So you're dealing with that. You're dealing with evidentiary issues that come up. Are we, in fact, getting all the evidence that we need to have a meaningful conversation to make a decision about how, you know, we want to proceed with the case? All of that. I mean, the process just to get to a jury is not an easy one. So it's more than just saying, I want to take my chances in front of a jury. And the effects on the families that, you know, people don't realize. I mean, families are like, no, you can't take that risk. Or no, we need you home now. So we're going to have to all collectively figure out how you're going to pay for these probation fines and fees so that you can at least be out here and not there. And we'll just figure out how we'll help you find a job with that conviction on your record rather than losing you, right, entirely to a system. So the juries come way late in the game, unfortunately. For a lot of people, and the loss is so significant before they get there. But once they get there, the mandatory minimums and all of those things come into the play. So the jury didn't have as much discretion as they should. But one thing I will say about juries, a lot of time people, when they are a jury, get jury duty. Unfortunately, a lot of people do see it as a burden. And if there was one thing I could say to a room full of potential juries is please come into court and be okay with being there, right? I'm not giving you the civic duty guilt speech. I'm giving you the people sitting at that table need you to take a seat and just listen. Just listen. And then make a decision.
And learn about jury nullification.
And, well, you know, that's the thing. That's the thing. You know, lawyers can't necessarily shout it out. But I can tell you this. I can tell you two things about that, right? There's not a law that says you are required to convict a human being.
Right.
You have all the authorities and the laws in the world. There's not a law that requires you to convict someone. And then ultimately, juries don't have to answer to anyone. They make a decision. And whatever that decision is, you move past it. And if there was something wrong in the law, then the courts will deal with that on appeal. So if you are the juror that's sitting in that spot, make a decision and make sure it's your honest decision, it's your own and what you can live with. And be okay with being there. I mean, that's the best I would say.
We have a queue now of questions, and I want to be respectful of our panelists' time and respectful of our next presenter's time, who is hopefully not wanting to like pull me off the panel to get started. But good. Okay. But I want to. I've been noticing the people raising their hands, and I believe you had a question. No.
You. Go.
Great. Okay. Over here then. You were next, and then I know Anna, Jill, Dr. Ben.
I just want to say I love this conversation. because it seems like so many things are being said. It's like a confluence of folks getting on the same page. And in Gwinnett County, we had what was called a State of the Child Summit toward the end of 2019. And what came out of that summit is that 52% of kindergartners are not prepared for kindergarten. And then, as we all know, then once they get to third grade, not reading on the right level, then that's where we determine what jails to build. And I'm of the bent that that is unacceptable in our society, unacceptable. And I do believe, like what's being said here today, is that we all, like you said, y'all earlier, this is about all of us. This is about our future. You know, these children are our future. We cannot sit back and relax. Okay, I think everybody, every citizen, I'm running to be the district attorney of Gwinnett County. First female, first African American. Okay, but what I want to say to the community is that none of us we don't have the luxury to sit down. We have to stand up and fight for our kids, because my whole thing is to keep them out of the criminal justice system. We should be going into schools, we should be knowing what's going on in the schools, we should be holding all of our electeds accountable, school board, everybody. Because we have to get up, we got to fight for them. And that's what I want to do. Of course, people have to be accountable if they break the law, they're violent. We got to do something about that. But we need to do it better.
Thank you, and thank you for also announcing that you're running. I know that there's, for the Fulton County DA's race, there's also a challenger as well. So just make sure you're informed, vote. The election is May 19th,
Yes.
is that right? So pay attention to all of the seats that are going to be open in your county and where you're voting, and make sure you know about the candidates.
Can I say something about the state of the children there? I think we had a forum, and I think it may be controversial to some people, but I think the first defense, and we always have to piggyback about education, is that everybody has a duty. And I'm a parent to 3 children. The first duty, if you want to keep your children out of jail, is to be a good parent. And you have to realize, number one, as Patsy said, is that the more education your child has and the more time you put in with your child, the less we're going to see that child. Like I said, as a defense attorney before, because as the public defender says, almost 85% of the people that we meet do not have a high school education. And when I was a defense attorney, if I had a plea on probation, I said it's mandatory that you get your GED or high school. So when we had a forum, I said, you know, one thing you need to do is, when that child, you need to look at what educational system you're in, read to your child, because the stats are there. 85%, if your child is not literate, he's going to be arrested. So I think we have to first move forward and look at ourselves as a parent and educate that child, because if your child is more educated, they're not so susceptible to being influenced. I had a person tell me at one of our forums that he was influenced even in college by friends to do things that were wrong. That's why he was arrested. And I just say is that the higher your education level your child, prepare that child, then that child is able to make better decisions. Just simple things. And I tell young people, number one, when you're in the grocery store, have your kid add up what you're doing, what you're buying. Because the mind is a powerful thing. When you are more intelligent, you're able to make more intelligent decisions.
Thank you. Anna?
I have a PSA to add on to what Coach said. There's 2,400 district attorneys all over the U.S. and they are by and large responsible for who gets elected. That is it. Like when a presidential candidate says that I'm going to change criminal justice reform, that's just not where change happens. Of those 2,400 DAs, 95% are white men. So there's 95% white men sentencing kids of color, people of color, women of color, right? So like, this is the system we live in. And I just want to add to what Coach said, that in Gwinnett, since 1992, Danny Porter, a white Republican, has been the DA. And so, you know, really, like there's, you know, Patty Austin Gaston is running, Wes Person is running. There are 2 black people running against Danny Porter. He's been in power since 1992.
Wow.
Right? This is a jurisdiction that sends people to death, that like has all sorts of problematic policies.
Another part about sentencing to death is black people are going to be ill.
And in Fulton, Paul Howard has been the district attorney since 1997, right? So he has not had a challenger since 2004. There is now a challenger in Fulton, Christian Rice Smith. So I just really encourage folks to be informed about where change happens and where these decisions are made, and to really get involved. And to Mr. Whiteside, my question is, I know you said prosecutions about family violence, battery, and DUI, but my question is, what is the effort that your office is making? I know you just, got there over the year to track what charges people are most arrested for, and can we, a year from now, expect your office to release that data to say we're locking up people for disorderly conduct, for criminal trespass, and my office is not going to do that anymore? And how is it
I can't say we're not going to do that.
leadership in the solicitor's office?
Well,
Right.
first of all,
if I finish my question, then I can do that. Okay. How is it that we get to leadership in a solicitor's office where we meaningfully begin to decriminalize the charges that really are a criminalization of poverty?
Well, first of all, I think one of the most important things we tried to do is take away the aspect of marijuana being illegal, and that takes away a lot of people being arrested. One of the biggest things we have for people who are arrested in Gwinnett now are family violence battery. And the highest victim in Gwinnett is a female. So our approach with that is, number one, we have a victim assistance person and program personnel who interview the victims. Number two, for family violence battery, we're trying to move forward with a family violence battery court where you have specialized people to look at those situations and punish those. I put a very strict sentence for family violence battery. We have a great deal of people, and we talk about certain things. You have a lot of people who are repeat offenders. In the past administration, you had people with 2 to 3 batteries against women, and they got probation. After the 3rd battery against a woman, it's supposed to be a felony. So I take a very strict view for battery against women because, number one, as an attorney and as a police officer, I saw women killed who had been released. The husband or boyfriend had been released. And they say, we're going to do a TPO, and that's just a piece of paper, and they kill that person. So we take a strict point against that. I try to recommend 60 days in jail. If you commit a family violence battery against a person, there's a bruise or something like that, we recommend 60 days in jail, but we're not in charge of that. The judges, a lot of times, they'll give them probation, and what'll happen is that person will come back again and state, well, they've been battered. But another thing, I think Patsy is in charge of our victim assistance personnel. I think we have 8 of those. A lot of your people will recant because, number one, they're scared of that person, and we try to treat them with respect because we know they've been battered. And we try to push forward and warn that defendant that there's going to be repercussions. And of course, I talk to the defense attorneys and say, you need to talk to your client, and we try to put forth to protect that person in regard to, and a lot of other offenses are really serious. Shoplifting is serious also. I recommend 10 days for that, not to punish a person, because the majority of those are young ladies and young men, and you don't realize that that's a crime of moral turpitude. You'll never get a job. So what we can do is give you a diversion. I'd rather put you in jail for 10 days, and then you get a diversion. You don't pay any any probation, and you don't want to commit a crime again because, wow, it's 2 for 1, you get 5. But now you're in jail for 5 days, so they say jail is an oppressive environment, oppressive. And after raising 2 boys and a girl, I know that people have to be punished because you have some young girls still have 2 or 3 shoplifting. Then they say, I'm going to college, and they don't get it. I think you recommended the Honorable Mayor says Statesboro, they arrest a lot of people down there for shoplifting, and they don't even do diversions. And then people find out, oh, I've graduated from college, but I can't get a job. So it's better to punish people up front, offer them a diversion, put them in jail, then they don't do that again for a short period of times on certain things. Go ahead.
We have another question. I want to stay in the spirit of thinking creatively and imaginatively about our response to people who find themselves caught up in our systems, in our criminal legal system, and recognizing that I thought Ms. Gravani and Brother Haroon made good points about the disproportionate impact of these offenses fall on poor Black and brown people, but we know that poor Black and brown people are not the only folks who are finding themselves in these situations, in cuffs and in police cars, and or they shouldn't be, right? They're not. White people commit crimes, white people mess up, white people make mistakes, and you don't see them. At least when I was a public defender, I didn't see them in my courtrooms. And so I just want to stay in the spirit of thinking creatively and imaginatively about how we might respond and why we are only responding to certain people in certain communities. And I think that we were in a good place there, and I want to encourage us to stay there. Jill, you had a question?
Yeah, so I'm going to speak on substance use disorder because I'm a person in long-term recovery from substance use disorder. And as a person who grew up in Gwinnett and was arrested for my substance use disorder, essentially, who had great parents and a high school degree, I wanted to say that, I went through the jail process and I went to court and my charges were dropped. So I know that it's possible to divert those charges to something else, and I had the opportunity to find treatment because of that. And I know because of my skin color, I didn't get convicted of those charges, and I know that for the charges that I actually had all at one time, I know that a Black or brown person would be sentenced to a much harsher penalty. And what I wanted to say was that I guess my question is, with all these cuts happening to mental health and substance use treatment and recovery, what I really want to say is, how are we going to funnel some of these funds, if we were to go towards decriminalization or legalization, to treatment and recovery, and not just for me, not just for white people, but also for Black and brown people?
I have a lot of opinions, but my job is not to tell you all. So if anyone else on the panel has ideas about or reactions.
I think you have to do what you're doing now. You have to go to the governor, and we're going to come out with a statement also that we don't believe there should be cuts. And I think the most important thing is to go to your courts and be where you are now and say that basically that you can't afford these cuts. The public defender cannot afford these cuts. We've had several cases, like I try to say, you have things going on, and when a person is schizophrenic, to me, their mind is not the same. The law is on a reasonable man standard, I believe, or proven for the reasonable average person. So things, the law gets away by saying, well, that person is mentally capable of being in court. When you're schizophrenic, let's say you commit a crime or a murder, I don't think your mind is the same. So these cuts are really dangerous to the American way of life. So I think persons such as you, young lady, you would form a group, see the people behind you, and start protesting and tell your story about what happened, because some of these issues, when you sentence people to death and they're schizophrenic, is that just, is that fair? Now, if they've killed someone, I think you need to be in prison. But I think you need to get together as a body, number one, and protest these cuts, because they really affect us as a prosecutor. Because a lot of times, I am an advocate for a defense attorney because I was one. And I know the hard work that I did, and we talk about felonies. When I was a defense attorney, the contract I had with a client was, it is mandatory that you hire an investigator. Because remember, you're fighting the state of Georgia. That's the police department, investigators, and everybody else. And so you have to advocate. So the thing about the cuts is that we have a lot of people that are mentally ill. When I was a deputy, let's say I would arrest somebody, bring him into jail, fight with him and everything else, take a gun from him, and then 3 months later, I see him in Kroger, and I say, Mr. White, I'm sorry about that. I've been taking my medicine. So it's a lot of things that happen out there that the mind, as the young lady said, a lot of men, by the time they're 23, a lot of them are schizophrenic. So we need to really advocate for health care and mental health.
I think we're gonna take 2 more comments from our panel, and then we've got to move on, unfortunately. If our panelists do want to stick around, they can answer your questions personally.
I want to say something, not long, just small. You gotta go over there and tell the governor and his friends, it's 2020 and everybody don't follow the good old boy system no more. You have to break their money up right. The poor people gotta eat too. You can't send everything to Buckhead no more, player. I'm sorry, I hate to hurt your feelings. Now, I don't, cause my thing is I drop them home falls off at the governor's mansion, and then he'll see that everybody don't listen to the good old boy system. I'm from Chicago. I don't give a you know what about no good old boy system.
And one thing I was just going to mention, with regards to cuts, right? Obviously, don't cut us, that'd be great. But the reality is I want people to kind of know what it is that we do outside of just showing up in a courtroom. So our office does have a number of social workers that are on staff and investigators that are on staff that are not contracted out. They are full-time employees that work with our office, and they help us come up with alternative, and I mean they work hard, right? They have to, because these are the things that the system doesn't take into account. So they work really hard finding community resources, reaching out to doctors and different agencies that will help service our clients. Sometimes we use it as an alternative to getting them out on bond, right? They'll get out on bond before they go get their probation case and pick up all of the fees for probation. Can we let them get out on their own recognizance, sign out on bond, and go to this treatment center for 6 months, right? And then they can come back in and we can see if we can resolve the case without a plea and the long-term consequences of a plea, etc. So when we talk about the money that comes in, is not just for the in-court work, it is also to help us build a more robust, right, set of community resources for our clients in places we can divert them. So I don't know that people know that we do that, but quite frankly, that is it's probably a bigger portion of what we end up having to do than going in the courtroom and trying cases every day because of the way the laws are set up. So budget cuts are not just the number of lawyers that are there, it also affects the number of mitigation specialists and resources we can provide for our defense teams.
Yeah, I think some final thoughts from Mayor Ted and Mr. McCain.
I just want to say thank you all for the advocacy that y'all are doing here at the Capitol today. Your courage and your boldness gives us courage and the ability to say we've got people who are saying we want change. There's a general default of politicians to say, if no one's saying anything about it, I guess everything's okay, and I'll go into something else. And we cannot let elected leaders, public officials, people who we pay the salaries of, to get away thinking everything's fine. We have to bother them. And when we bother them, and hopefully we find champions in that process, they say, I've got 100 people, I've got 1,000 people, I've got people who are demanding this change, and I'm here to represent them. And it literally is one by one. It's work that we're doing up here, the folks in this panel, the folks that y'all are doing, talking to, whether it's the governor, state senators, state house members, the work that Senator Harold Jones is doing, that Donald Cloud's doing. Like, we have to support them and say that we're behind them, because that gives us more courage to keep pushing our colleagues to make change. So thank you all.
Well said, thank you. Well, let's thank our panelists. And while we get set up for our next, we're just going to step outside just a bit of the criminal context and think about how the overcriminalization seeps its way into the civil context with family poverty and family debt. And we'll get that set up right now. We all know that the criminalization of poverty takes a variety of forms. And if you're familiar with the way in which Georgia treats child support debt, you will know exactly what I'm talking about. If you are unfamiliar with how Georgia treats child support debt, Mr. Ross Brockway from Georgia Justice Project is here to talk to us about the ways in which family poverty and debt gets criminalized outside of the criminal legal system.
Thanks, Joseph. Thank you so much for staying. All right, so I'm just going to speak for 5 or 10 minutes, because you sat a long time. And I want to talk about the criminalization of family poverty. Because we know from the panelists and from our own experiences that we criminalize poverty in this state, but that has a huge impact on families. And in fact, poor families are criminalized for being poor families in the civil and the criminal space. So context is everything here. Everybody hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thanks. So context is everything here. So I'm going to make a couple points about context. The first point about context is that there are quite a few poor families in Georgia. 1 in 3 rural children are in poverty in Georgia. It's more like 1 in 4 children across the state are in poverty. And if you think of low income as 200% of the poverty, 200% of the federal poverty guideline, then 49% of children in Georgia are low income. So we have a lot of low income families, a lot of low income children, and then the question is, how do we support them? Or do we support them? Or do we hurt them? Through our legal institutions. Okay, so that was the first point. Second point is if you have a criminal record in Georgia, or if you're incarcerated under supervision, all the stuff that they're talking about for some of these minor crimes, that impacts your family. So raise your hand if you have a child or children. No. There's a majority of people here. All those people who go through the system, who are charged with minor crimes, who go to jail for a few days or months, who get probation, who have a criminal record to deal with, they have kids too. They have families. And when you cannot get a job because of a criminal record, that impacts your kids. That impacts your ability to feed your kids and care for your kids. If you're applying for housing and you have a criminal record, 1, you might have a problem getting housing at all, as many of our clients do at Georgia Justice Project. But if you do get housing, you might have to pay a higher rent or higher deposit, and that affects your ability to take care of your children. That affects child stability, that leads to child and family homelessness, and criminal records are a big problem in the state. Over 4.2 million people in Georgia, adults, have a criminal record. 40% of the population. So, incidentally, there's a campaign going on called the Second Chance Campaign. I encourage everybody to get involved in it. With a lot of organizations, Georgia Justice Project and many other organizations are trying to pass a law that would allow convictions to come off your record, because by and large convictions can never come off your record, even minor ones, even misdemeanor marijuana possession or shoplifting charges. Most of them can't come off your record very easily. So next Friday, there's a Talk Justice Tuesday event. Next Tuesday, that makes sense, thank you. There's a Talk Justice Tuesday event on Second Chances. It's at the Presbyterian Church across the street. 9 o'clock, you should all go to that and get involved in that campaign. But 40% of people have a criminal record in Georgia. In addition, we have in Georgia the highest rate of carceral control, correctional control, in the country or the world. A higher percentage of people in Georgia are in prison, jail, on parole, or under probation in Georgia than anywhere else in the world. It's 527,000 people are under carceral control in Georgia. Now, incidentally, in 1860, at the height of slavery, the number of people who were enslaved in Georgia was 462,000. It's 462,000 people. So we have more people under carceral control today than were enslaved at the height of slavery in the state that had the second highest enslaved population. Also, I said that 40% number, 44% of people in Georgia were enslaved in 1860. So that gets to this next point, and it's maybe coming toward the main point, which is that these things are a legacy of slavery. Under slavery, as some of you know, if your family members were enslaved, if your ancestors were enslaved, you know better than me. But families were torn apart. Marriage was often prohibited. When somebody did get married, or a couple got married or had a kid, oftentimes they were torn apart, sold to another plantation. Kids were taken from their parents. And white society and white legal institutions were so scared of Nat Turner, so scared of enslaved people taking up independence and power and liberation, rebellion, that they decided it was really good to separate families and really good to pit people against each other. It's a way of keeping people down. We do the same things in Georgia today. By prosecuting people for minor crimes, mainly black people, and thus impacting their kids, but also through our system of child support debt enforcement. So, poor people break up, poor people get divorced, and the Solicitor General White made a couple points that I agreed with a lot of what he said, but I disagree with these points. One, that people need punishment. People need punishment. And two, that parents got to step up. And parents need to handle their kids. And here's why that's wrong. Is that white parents and wealthy families, like, they aren't punished, right? When I got in trouble in Scottsdale, Arizona, white community, a wealthy community, when I got in trouble, the police drove me home. Right? That wouldn't happen, obviously, to a poor black person in rural Georgia. It doesn't happen. White people in wealthy families are given the opportunity to parent their kids, to solve problems within the family on their own. In Georgia, and for low-income families, the state intervenes. The state punishes. So one, orders are set, child support orders are set without real respect to anybody's poverty. It's called income imputation. And for low-income people, it's routine. You come in, both parents are poor, both parents are struggling, they've separated, and without evidence of income, because maybe there isn't income or maybe there's not a lot of it, the judge will just assign an income to that non-custodial parent that he or she thinks the person could make. Income imputation. Usually it's based on a full-time minimum wage salary, which would produce a child support order of about $1,265. That's the most common child support order. Okay, so you have a child support order that's just really high, and you have a poor family where the mom, the dad, the custodial parent, the non-custodial parent, everybody's struggling. But rather than allow that family to work it out themselves and do the best they can, we punish people, we criminalize families when people fall behind. And you get this sort of cycle of debt and incarceration. You fall behind on child support payments, your license is suspended. Now you can't get to work. Maybe you're responsible for your kids every other weekend or every weekend, and you have to pick them up from school on Fridays. Now you can't. So you get picked up with a driving with a suspended license charge. We didn't talk about that today, but that's the most common charge, criminal charge in most of the country. Or you go to work. You go to work because you have to feed your family, because you go to school because you have to get your daughter or son to school, and you picked up with a driving with a suspended license charge. That's a criminal record. That's time in jail. And that, again, to disagree just a little bit with Solicitor General White said, I'm sorry, because he actually would prefer to be here. But being in jail for 10 days can destroy a family. Okay? So, maybe you go to jail with driving with a suspended license charge. Maybe you don't. Maybe you just lose your license. Right? And don't drive. But now you can't get to work. Right? So you fall behind more in debt. You're less able to pay your child support. I'm speaking from the perspective of the non-custodial parent here, but what happens to the kid in that case? Finally, when somebody gets behind on child support enough, one of two things happens. Either A, they're charged with criminal child abandonment. Sounds really bad. You've abandoned your child. You've neglected or abused it. But no, actually, maybe you're the best parent. Maybe you're like Walter Scott, right? Who'd been jailed 3 times for non-payment of child support because he was poor. And then when he was pulled over by police in South Carolina, he ran, and he was shot 4 or 5 times in the back. But by all accounts, he was a good parent. Thanks. So maybe you're a great parent, but now you face this child abandonment charge because you're poor. You go to jail. Kosha emailed me yesterday about a woman in jail in Bradley County in southeast Georgia with a $9,000 bond on a child abandonment warrant. She got arrested after picking up her kids for weekend visitation. She got pulled over, I imagine. She got handcuffed in front of her kids. She got taken away. And they got sent to her ex-husband or to who knows where. And now she's in jail. She's been in jail since October because her family can't pay the $9,000 bond. That's common. You get charged with child abandonment, you get convicted, and that's on your record forever. Back to the other problem. Or you get charged with civil contempt. Civil contempt is civil, but you still go to jail for it. And you don't have a right to an attorney, you don't have the presumption of innocence, and you can be in jail indefinitely until you pay a purge amount set by the court. So poor families struggle. Poor families are often separated. But rather than supporting families, we're doing the same thing that plantation owners and slave-catching militias did in the 1800s. We're tearing families apart, we're punishing them, we're criminalizing them, rather than supporting them in their struggle. That benefits some people, but it certainly doesn't benefit the poor families, the black families in Georgia. So, we're trying to change this law. We're trying to make child support orders more accurate. We're trying to end the suspension of driver's license because of child support. We're trying to stop the rampant jailing of people because they're poor, because of poor parents. And we're trying to make child support work for low-income kids. So, I didn't invite you to get involved in that campaign. We have a working group of some organizations that are here that are committed to that, and we'd love you to be a part of it. And I really appreciate you giving me this time. I invite you to ask questions or to give comments from your experience if you'd like. It's Sean.
When you invite us to get involved, what does that mean? What are you looking for from us to get involved in help?
So I think, if you are from an organization that cares about this issue, or cares about family poverty, cares about the criminalization of poverty, I want you to be involved in this working group that's thinking about how do we change the laws and policies in this state to work better for families and kids. Or if you're somebody who is just an individual who's passionate and wants to advocate, and maybe this has touched you in some way, I want you involved in that way too, if you're willing to give your insight and your time. But then there will be bills, there will be events going forward. So I invite you to just email me, and I'll put you on a list of people that can get updates. Thanks, Sean. Yeah. Yes.
Hey, it's good to see you again. I remember seeing you at Reform Georgia's expungement event.
Right on.
I wanted to know, does your organization collaborate with other grassroots organizations to fund education events in their communities so that you guys can have collaborative efforts and voices in the education that's coming into their communities?
Yeah, so does one of you all want to speak to this? This is my colleagues at GJP.
Well, we do a lot of education in the community. Up until the last few years, it's been mostly around criminal records and expungement, but we are trying to expand to other issues such as child support and probation. But we did over 100 presentations around the state last year.
I kind of worry that sometimes the message is being mixed because it's being translated through terms of corporate versus harm reduction terms that are fluid in all aspects. Like even just a moment ago, we talked about lack of education being a problem versus emotional support, coping strategies, and tools they can actually utilize to move forward versus just looking at one aspect of why behaviors are what they are, one, and then two, how we rectify them after, either just through punishment or trying to essentially eliminate the value of what's transpiring. It's a holistic thing, so we have to have holistic voices in the education process, not just the people who are funding the event.
Yes, that's right, and it's got to be led by people who've been impacted, and we gotta organize, right? We gotta build power. Because going back to that idea that ultimately this system of carceral control and this system of child support debt enforcement is a way to break up poor and black families in order to decrease and diminish or suppress their power.
Right, because there are no co-parenting classes offered. I came up with an idea in my head. Maybe I could create a co-parenting program, and I presented it, and it was shut down. Like, I thought it would have been well received, but when you understand it's a business, and based off of how many people are locked up, how many people paid, how many, literally there's a chart in the back of their office that says these things. There's no chart that says how many families they kept together, how many people they taught better communication, and ultimately when you force somebody to pay or put them in these situations, they're naturally going to be angry with the other person, so those are putting them in life-threatening situations that aren't being really accounted for. It's just being minimized as numbers on a board, and so they have to start accounting for solutions for those things. I think a co-parenting class and communication class would be an excellent way of getting into the community and fostering change. You know, we can have education sessions about stuff we already know, or we could actually get some feedback and translate that into working data of now this is what we can do for the next phase and see how that goes.
I love that. Let's talk after. Yeah? Yes?
A very simple question. Can you repeat your name?
Sure. It's Ross Brockway.
Thank you.
I had it up on a PowerPoint here, but then I didn't use the PowerPoint. Ross Brockway, B-R-O-C-K-W-A-Y. And I have a card if you want it, so love to talk to anybody who'd like to talk.
What's your email address, Ross?
Ross@gjp.org. ROSS@gjp.org. Thanks. Good? All right. Oh, yes.
We're all out.
We've worked together on this.
We absolutely have. Hi, everybody. I'm Charlton Bivens. I serve on the Clayton County Defects Board as well as the State Defects Association. And I'm trying to think how we can partner in that situation from a defects perspective, as it relates to all the disadvantages that happen when the family splits. So yes, I'm in. I'm in.
And that brings up an interesting point that oftentimes these organizations are working against each other, sort of, in a kind of productive way. I went to a meeting with a DHS meeting when I was first getting started on this work, and the Division of Child Support Services people came up and they gave their presentation, and then the DFACS people came up and they gave their presentation, And the presentation given by the defects person was about this kid named Kevin. And Kevin was a junior in high school, great grades, an honors student, an athlete, you know, a star, and lived with a single dad in an apartment. And that single dad had custody of Kevin, but also owed child support for another kid who lived with his ex. And he's struggling, he was poor, and he got behind on child support. So, cops came to his house, arrested the dad, and when Kevin came home from school, the dad wasn't there. And then that dad was in jail for some many months, with Kevin living alone in that apartment, until, because of non-payment of rent, he got evicted. Then DFACS realizes that he's alone, so DFACS scrambles to try and get a foster home for him, and they're able to do this. And DFACS shows this as a success story. I guess it is a success story because they got him a home. They worked quickly. But they were working in direct opposition with this other department within the Department of Human Services, DCSS, that's prosecuting the dad, rather than supporting the dad to take care of Kevin and also his other child, right? So defects, I think, you know, there's always more communication that needs to happen between these agencies, and I think defects, it'd be good to get them involved in this campaign to change child support.
And that's where I'm going. Right. Okay, I understand. When I do this. So
Yeah.
Great.
Okay, thanks for waiting, everybody. I appreciate it. Thanks, Coach.
I don't really have many closing remarks, but we made a list of pending legislation that's relevant to our conversation today with decriminalization and reclassification. It tells you who the bill sponsors are, so if you want to lobby and advocate for yourselves, and you can do that. We also made a fact sheet that just kind of contextualizes the problem in Georgia. We took some examples from different municipalities. Mayor Ted touched on some of it, you know, the revenue generating that comes from prosecuting these petty offenses. And then there's like a bunch of ACLU stuff because I brought this up and I'm biased. There are a lot of flyers back there for us. And yeah, thanks for being here and staying engaged. Oh, I should recognize the folks who work with me as well. Ryan Graham from the Libertarian Party of Georgia was co-hosting and great collaborator with me. Ross Brocco, Georgia Justice Project. Ira from Southern Center for Human Rights. Carol from Georgia Innocence Project. And I think that's it. Thanks for all of your work and thanks for being here.